Your spouse won't communicate with you. You kind of never know what they're thinking. They come home from work and they give you like one-word answers and there's no depth to your conversations. What in the world do you do? Join us today as Dr. Sean McDowell answers this question for us. How can I get my spouse to communicate with me? Watch this. All right, glad you're joining us today for our little snippets from our question and answer series. We're doing this, we're taking these questions from our Marriage Questions Conference that we did a while back. We brought in 3 really great Bible teachers, Mike Winger, Alan Parr, and Sean McDowell. These guys not only know their Bible, but they're very, very wise when it comes to what the Bible says and how to apply it to your life. So we brought them in, and one of the questions was, how can I communicate with my spouse? How can I get my spouse to communicate with me? And some of you know that all too well because you married someone who's very, very quiet and they don't like to share very much, and you honestly never know what they're thinking. Do they want to go out to dinner? Or do they not want to go out to dinner? Do they want to go to the movies, or do they want to stay home? Like, you just can't, they don't communicate. And you just don't know how to get them to open up and talk. So today, Sean McDowell is going to answer that question for us. How do I get my spouse to communicate with me? Watch this. How can I get my spouse to communicate with me?
You can't get your spouse to do anything.
Exactly. But think about, like, you have some people that love to talk and love to.
I agree. Yeah. Let me reframe the question. Instead of how can I get my spouse to communicate with me, a better question might be, what can I do better to communicate more effectively with my spouse? You heard Mike Winger say, I can't control what somebody else thinks and feels. I can control my response. So rather than saying, how do I get my spouse to do A, B, and C, fill in the blank, a question might be, how can I communicate more effectively with my spouse? So when I was thinking about this question, there might be reasons why your spouse doesn't communicate great. One of them might be that your spouse just doesn't know how to communicate. They might not know how. It's somewhat embarrassing. Probably 10 years ago, a student of mine graduated, finished law school about a year ago, got married, and so I guess I was in like my mid-30s, and she's in my class, and she said something to my wife. She goes, what's it like to be married to somebody who's such a good communicator? My wife's response was to laugh. Now, why? Because there's a big difference between communicating on stage, writing books, and interpersonally communicating and sharing your feelings in a real, authentic way. Now, my wife laughed. I've come a long, long ways. But don't think, oh, John and Alan and Mike can make videos. That means they're great interpersonal communicators. You guys might be. I can only speak for myself. And I think back of so much more early on. I really have come a long ways and have worked at this. But early on in our marriage, I think at times where she would sit there and would coach me through. So what are you feeling? Maybe why are you feeling this way? Help me understand. What would you say? Say something. And I look back and I'm like, dear Lord, it was like a parent and a kid. I just had to learn how to communicate and express my feelings. And I come from a family where my parents do this well. So I only say that is that all of us have different things that come naturally to us. My wife is like, I don't want to speak on stage. I can do that. So maybe the person doesn't communicate well because they really just don't know how. And so my wife could have been like, she could have nagged. She could have been like, what's the matter with you? She could have shamed me. She didn't. She was patient. She was gracious and just lovingly helped me get better at communicating that way. It could be as simple as that. Now, it could be deeper. Your spouse doesn't know how to communicate because there's a lot of hurt and pain in their past, and they've never learned how to deal with that hurt and pain by communicating it. That's a very different issue. that's where you might need the help of a counselor, somebody outside of you, to just go deeper and find out, is there a father wound? Is there whatever abuse or deeper issue that can communicate? There could be a fear of sharing certain things. So when I get a question, what do I do to get my spouse to communicate better? Partly, we just have to get to the heart of, why doesn't your spouse communicate better? Identify the problem, and then in a sense, try to fix it. So all I can say is, as a husband, I can't speak for, actually this hasn't been an issue. I've never tried to help my wife communicate better, at least interpersonally, so to speak. Is what she does is she encourages me. And again, not so much anymore. We've been married 22 years, but for a long time, she was positive, she was encouraging, she was helpful. I actually remember one time we were dating, she's like, I'm gonna ask you a question, I'm not gonna say anything. We were on the phone silent 5 minutes. I didn't even know what to say. I just sat there. And she's like, I'm not saying anything. And that was actually, looking back, a very wise way at that moment to just kind of lovingly force me to learn to communicate better. So start with your own communication. Try to figure out what's the heart of why your husband doesn't communicate. Is it fear? Is it hurt? Is it inability? Maybe the issue is he just doesn't care. But once we find what the heart of the issue is, then we can better address it, right? If your car is out of gas, it doesn't do any good to change the spark plugs or get a new transmission. Identify it and try to deal with it. And in communication, once you can identify what it is, then you can start moving forward. And you could, I don't want to say too much more, but the times where you positively feel like your spouse did communicate well, point that out. Hey, I really appreciate that you took the time to explain this to me. That's helpful to me. I guess I'll say one more thing, is I have a relationship I'm very close with. And in this relationship, in this married couple, one of them has severe, deep sexual abuse in the past and has experienced healing from this, but in some ways has affected his ability to share certain emotional truths in a way the damage is so deep. Mm-hmm. So his wife recognizes that and deals with just who he is, where he is, has fair expectations, and their marriage thrives because of it.
All right, hopefully that helped you today. If that is you and you struggle with communication in your marriage, if you want to watch the other 8 questions in this session with Dr. Sean McDowell, I'll put the link below if you're watching. It's a YouTube link. And if you want to watch the entire marriage series, you can just go to womensbiblestudy.com. It's called the Marriage Questions Conference. So hopefully that helped you today. Have a really good day.